That's... Yeah, you like being correct. No, I understand you. But forgive me for telling you one little incident, which really stuck in my mind. I was in Spain, and it was at a teachers' conference, and we were all having a jolly nice dinner afterwards. And as the waitress passed, I said to her in what I thought to be my perfect Spanish, "Oiga, perdón, a ver si nos podría proporcionar más una botella de vino," which sort of is a rather flowery way of saying, "Could we have another bottle of wine, please?" And the person sitting opposite me, who shall be nameless, said to me, "Oh, you don't have a very good accent, do you?" Now, as a matter of fact, it's true. But since, like for you, English is part of your character now, who you are, well, Spanish is part of who I am as well, and it's part of my life. And this guy, who was not my teacher, actually criticized my pronunciation. I felt really bad about that. And I still feel bad about it, because it happened in 1923, and I'm still mad, you know. I felt kind of bad about it. And what it reminded me was that, yes, we all know that teachers correct, but it's not a simple issue, correction. It's an issue where a whole lot of human emotions come into play. And if you get it wrong, as the teacher, you can really mess things up. Because every time a student makes a mistake in class, you have to make a judgment. That's actually not true. You have to make about 4 or 5 judgments. The first judgment you have to make is, was it wrong? Second judgment is, actually, what was wrong? Because sometimes it's not that easy to work out what was wrong. The third judgment you have to make is, should I correct it, or shall I just let it go? The fourth judgment you have to make is, well, actually, should I correct it, or should somebody else correct it? And suddenly, in that one moment when students just make a mistake, you have to work out what to do. My feeling is that what a lot of us do is we correct some things because we know how to, and we don't correct some other things maybe because we don't. Or rather, we correct some things because we're almost programmed to correct them. JJ was talking about the good old snake today and the third person singular S. We all correct the third person singular S because we are genetically programmed as teachers to correct the third person singular S. And not only that, it's easy to correct the third person singular S. It may not be very effective, but it's easy to do. We know how to do it. But frequently when students make mistakes, we know something's wrong, but we're not quite sure what and what to do about it. We have to make a judgment also about how I'm going to correct you. And if I know you well enough, I'll know how to get it about right. I need to be careful. Because a lot of what we do as teachers, we kind of, I mean, correction is such good fun, isn't it? And you say, ha, ha, like that, and it's great. And if she's the right person, I've just done something good. But you have to be a bit more careful in that, because maybe she's not quite so happy to get me laughing at her and that kind of thing as other people. So that's the sort of stall I'm setting out. But it's in the context also of some serious doubts about correction as a useful technique. This is Jane and Dave Willis in a book called Doing Task-Based Learning, published by it's an Oxford book, isn't it? Yeah, an Oxford book. And they say, so correction is useful, but it's not nearly as effective as we would like to think. We've already seen how learners persist in errors with forms like do questions in spite of constant correction. So correction should be used sparingly. It's better to provide a positive focus on appropriate forms than to spend too much time on correction. And when I've heard them talk, particularly when I've heard Dave Willis talk, one of the sort of grey eminences of our profession, I've heard him say quite categorically that he thinks correction is a waste of time. Somewhat problematic for us as teacher trainers, those of us who train teachers or write about training. Because in my books and in my teacher training, I do what you do if you're teacher trainers, which is I help you to discover different ways of showing someone's made a mistake, or different techniques, or what to put on the board, or whether the raised eyebrow is a good correction technique, or whatever it is, like that. But at the end of last year, a close friend of mine, a woman called Petra Pointner, who works in the University of Aachen in Germany, invited me over to Germany to give sessions at 3 universities in that country. And she asked me in particular to do a 6-hour workshop on correction, which was somewhat daunting, because I'm used to talking about correction in short little training bites and as a feedback to a teacher observation or something like that. Now, we don't have 6 hours, don't panic. But what it forced me to do is to go back and look again at a subject I thought that I was completely familiar with. Or rather, that's a lie, not completely familiar with, but a subject that I have been used to talking about. So I went off and got myself, that's Willis & Willis, 2007, doing task-based writing. I went back and started to get myself familiar with some of the discussions about correction. Articles going back to the early 90s and through to the late noughties and stuff like that. And a lot of the articles that I read and love come from this amazing journal called the ELT Journal. If you're not a subscriber, the one thing you could do at the end of this is to go out and get a subscription. I get so much of my knowledge from this wonderful journal, which is an incredible mixture of theory and practice. A very good mixture of theory and practice. Here are some of the articles which I thought would be interesting to share with you in an attempt to think about some of the issues we've talked about. Kamarava-Davilu's article in way back in 1991 was called something like Teacher Intention and Student Interpretation. And in it, he proved quite conclusively that when the teachers thought they were teaching something for a reason, the students frequently completely misinterpreted the reason. So he has one lovely example of students who were given a page, because this is pre-digital, they were given a page of small ads from a newspaper, because what the teacher wanted them to do was get practice in, oh God, is it scanning or skimming? I can never remember which. Scanning, going for specific information. When the students were asked later what they thought the lesson had been about, one of them said it was punctuation. Another said it was something to do with a definite article because they'd had a class on the day. They didn't get what the teacher thought he or she was giving. But the bit in this article which I love almost more than any other thing I've ever read about language teaching is a transcript of a little incident in a class at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And in this class, do you know the University of Alabama? Yeah. You've been there?
Well, I was admitted, but then I went to Penn State. So.
You could have gone to the University of Alabama. Yeah, why? The reason I'm saying that is I just think anywhere called Tuscaloosa is somewhere you have to live in. It's just the most beautiful name, isn't it? So here you are, two students in a lesson at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. They're both Asian students, a Korean and a Japanese student. This fact will become significant in a minute. And they're doing a role play. And the role play is about buying a wedding dress. And I think I can remember this exactly, but I'll give you a flavor anyway. This is how it goes. The first student, looking at the second student, says, "The wedding dress?" And the Japanese student says, "A little costly." I forgot to mention that hovering is the teacher, listening to what's going on, like teachers do, you know? So, the wedding dress, a little costly. And the teacher goes, "Too expensive. Too expensive." The student says, "It's a little costly." Because the student has learnt costly and is very proud of having learnt costly. This is their new word, right? So the teacher says a bit louder, "Too expensive." And the student says, I think I might have missed out a line, but the student says, in a little bit of sort of upset, the student says, "I can't say costly." At which point, the transcript, the teacher says, "Well," and then it goes brackets, "long pause." brackets. And you know what's happening in that long pause. The teacher has rightly identified that there's something wrong with using the word costly about a wedding dress. What is the difference, dear people here in Istanbul? What is the difference between costly and expensive? Can anyone explain it? Well, no, you don't have to try. The whole problem that the teacher has is, I have never used the word costly when I should have used expensive, and I have never used the word expensive when I should have used the word costly. But I haven't the slightest idea why one is correct and the other isn't. Well, I do, because I've looked it up, but that's another story. The teacher is suddenly faced with a situation where they've tried to intervene and make a correction, and they suddenly realize that they haven't the slightest idea. Because this is not the third person singular, the present simple. No snakes will do. You're just suddenly, oh my God, I know it's wrong, but. So what happens is, so let's go back to, because it's got a punchline and it makes me laugh this. Let's go back. The student says, I can't say costly. And the teacher says, well, long pause. Yeah, costly is okay, but normally we say too expensive. To which the student replies, remember this is a Japanese student. In Japan, honorifics are really important. So once you've called someone sensei, which is the word for teacher, you give them respect. And once you've given someone respect, you can't start saying bad things about them. So the student finally loses the war and they say, okay, you're the teacher. And the teacher, who must be from California or something, says, oh no, you don't have to agree with me. and the student goes, But I love it. It's my favorite piece of transcription because there's the whole of teaching wrapped up in that little bit of transcript. The point of the story is, I've gone on too long. The point of the story is quite clear, isn't it? The problem about oral correction is quite frequently we're not nearly as good at it as we suppose we should be when we do a teacher training course. Why? Because of costly and expensive. Because actually trying to find out what the mistake was and how to best help students understand it, and trying to do that instantaneously is bloody difficult. Here's an article by Hamid from 2007. This is a really fascinating article, and the moment I tell you about it, you'll nod your heads. What he says is, when teachers correct students' written work and the student is not present, we frequently are trying to guess what the student meant. You come across something that's clearly wrong. You have to guess what the student was trying to say. And because they're not in front of you, you have no idea. So you guess. And you make your corrections on the basis of the guess. But you might not be correcting the right thing at all. And the student might not have made the mistake you thought they made because they were actually doing something else. An awful lot of written correction, in other words, may be misguided, or at best, a clever guess. Here's another thing which is worth thinking about, which is, that's right, at the University of Cologne, we weren't talking about correction, that was in the University of Aachen, but at lunch I said, well, tomorrow I've got this 6-hour workshop on correction, and so we were talking about it. And one teacher said to me, the cry of every person in this room who has to correct written homework, and the cry is this: I spent hours every evening sitting at home correcting student work and using my correction symbols when I should be drinking wine and watching the television. I spent hours and hours. And you know what happens? When I go into class the next morning, I hand it back, students put it in their folders and chuck it away. It's so unfair, she said. And everyone here knows exactly what she's talking about. Let's have a, oh yes, this is a fantastic article by Wong and Waring from 2009. And it goes like this. The whole of their article is about the use of the term very good. If you've read this article, it's what they essentially say is, when I say to you, question what time, and the student says, what time does she get up? And I say, very good. That's fine, because I've indicated she's got it right. But the problem about very good is the moment you say very good, you shut the door. Because you normally say it with a falling intonation. So you say, if I say, do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah.
How many brothers have you got?
A brother.
Very good. And I've shut the door. We can't continue the conversation. It's gone. Or if I want to continue the conversation, I'm going to have to ask her again. But very good just kills the conversation stone dead. Especially if I say, very good. That falling intonation is a clear indication that it's over, it's finished. Caffin, in that wonderful Williams and Burden book called Psychology for Language Teachers, mentioned an MA thesis by a guy called Caffin, in which he went, and this is well attested by teachers in just about every sector, but it sort of changes when you move from primary to secondary and something like that, which is that in Caffin's study they went and talked to teenagers. And the thing that irritated the hell out of teenagers more than anything else was teachers praising them when they couldn't work out what they were being praised for. That saying very good when you don't think there's anything to say very good about is worse than not saying anything. Well done. But she didn't do anything very good. So why am I saying well done? And yet as teachers, as we kind of have this default, don't we? You say, oh, well done. Good, yes, good, good, good. It wasn't good. I just said, you know. Maybe the whole problem about discussing correction is we use the C word all the time, the correction word. And maybe we're putting this, maybe we're going in the wrong direction. And we shouldn't be using the C word, we should be using the F word. And the F word, of course, stands for, F is for feedback. Or, in the words of Richard Cullen from his article in 2002, F stands for follow-up move. Maybe instead of thinking about correction, what we should think about instead is when a student says something, I'm going to follow it up. And the issue is not correction or not correction, it's what do I do when you say something? Correction may be one option, but there are many others. Cullen, for example, talks about, I've said this already, I guess. He describes the typical mechanism that we're all familiar with, which is the IRF move. What's the IRF move? Initiate, respond, feedback. So that's exactly, you know, I hold up a picture, that's the initiate. She says, it's a dog, and I say, very good. And just as Wong and Waring say that very good is not a satisfactory response, the IRF model may have its place, by the way, because I may need you to say something so I know if you've got it right or not. But in the end, it's a fairly sterile kind of encounter. Much better, perhaps, is the issue of reformulation. So if she says, suppose she were to say, which you never would because you are perfect, but suppose she was to say, I have seen my brother yesterday, I might say, oh, so you saw your brother yesterday, did you? And reformulation is a way of showing that I'm listening to you. And that's a good start. And it's better than very good because if I just say, very good, as John Fanslow says about very good, the problem about very good is if she says, I have seen my brother yesterday, and I say, if she says, I saw my brother yesterday, and I say, very good, if she thinks at all, she's thinking, now, what was very good? It was good that I saw my brother. Ah, that's good. It was good that I spoke. It was good that you don't know what's going on. So reformulation, at the very least, is a way of indicating that I've listened to you and I'm pleased that you offered this sentence. And I've corrected it indirectly, and you will find a lot of people saying that reformulation is one of the sort of most favorite kind of correction strategies, because it's not like saying, silly girl, you got it wrong. It's exactly what you called indirect correction. There's a problem about reformulation, of course. which is this is what normally happens with reformulation. She says, I have seen my brother yesterday. So I say, oh, you saw your brother yesterday, did you? And she says, yes, I have seen him yesterday. That's what often happens. Nevertheless, reformulation as a follow-up move has its advantages. Elaboration is another way of following up, in the sense that it shows that I'm interested in you, and let's turn this into an opportunity for more learning. So, where did you see your brother? Or why did you meet? Or when was the last time you met him? Something I do which gets you to elaborate on what you said. And that has two advantages, which is, number one, it shows I care, or at least that I'm listening. And number two, it's going to push you to go further. There's comment. Richard Cullen mentions comment as a separate thing. Where, I saw my brother yesterday. Oh, that must have been nice. At least that's showing that I'm with you and that I care. I might just repeat, because that's something we do in conversation a lot. We just repeat. And so she says, I saw my brother yesterday. And I said, oh, you saw your brother yesterday. I'm not sure what it does, but at least it shows that I'm with you. The main issue about follow-up moves is that the most important thing is teacher responsiveness. And what it makes me think a lot of the time is that sometimes when we're terribly focused in on a kind of accuracy drill or something like that, we don't sound responsive. We're not really responding. We're just saying, we're just basically making a mental click, yes or no, correct or not correct. But what I just said, even just saying, oh, you saw your brother yesterday, is at least a response on a more human level. Wong and Waring, what was their article about? Do you remember? Wong and Waring, what were they talking about? Which ones were they? They were the very good people. They were the ones who said very good is a bit of a shut door. I'm trying to work, I have no sense of time. Wong and Waring say that instead of saying very good, there are things you can do. In the first place, if you are going to compliment a student, don't use falling intonation. As simple as that. Oh, great. Would be much more interesting than very good, plonk. Because very good, plonk, is a shut door. But they actually suggest something else, and I've called them the 3 Ps. They don't call it the 3 Ps, but you know, you get obsessed. If you grew up with presentation, practice, and production, the whole of life is 3 Ps, essentially. So I've called it the 3 Ps. And the one that absolutely fascinates me is their idea of pursuit. That one of the best kinds of follow-up a teacher can give is a pursuit question. And a pursuit question is similar to some of the things Richard Cullen is saying, but it's simply, oh, you saw your brother yesterday. Where did you see him? Or, oh, I've seen my brother yesterday. Oh, have seen your brother yesterday? Is there another way you could say that? Or something. A pursue, I'm pursuing her, I'm provoking her, I'm trying to push her further. I'm chasing her. I'm chasing, if you like, not her, but I'm chasing what she said. And instantly, my response becomes a creative agent for what's going to happen. And who was talking yesterday about the difference between a problem and problematize? Oh, Divya in this room, she was talking about research, that's right. They suggest that that problematizing is a really good idea, that turning everything into a little bit of a problem. Hey, by the way, do you think what she just said was right, everybody? What do you think? Would you say it like that? Even if it's correct, you turn it into a problem. And the moment you turn it into a problem, I've got your brain going. And once your brain's going, we've got the chance for some movement to take place. And she absolutely classically says that, that using peers, the other students in the class, makes that problematizing more creative than making it all teacher-like. JJ was asking, how many of you, the thing about the board, who writes on the board, who do you know? The moment the board becomes a democratic writing instrument, everything changes. Well, it's never going to be that democratic because I'm the teacher, okay? But the moment people are involved, things happen. And the moment that the class is involved in solving the problem and working out what was right, the better. And I would have shown you a video of Lisa. This is Lisa, a South African teacher working in Singapore. And this was a workshop in Bali the other day. And she described, as I'm sure you can, those of you who are good at lip reading will have gathered exactly what she's saying. But what she's actually saying is, she does a lot of work with Web 2 tools, and she got her students designing cartoons using something like, what's the cartoon one? Is it Voki? No, Glogs. I can't remember. Anyway, one of these sites where you can create avatars and then record conversations and things like that. And she got her students doing that, and then she got them to send them to other students for them to comment and to talk about and whether they thought it was right and suggest corrections and things like that. And then they played it to other people and they all suggested corrections. And in the end, they came up with stuff that they were happy to put up on the internet for their classmates and anybody else to watch. But that part of the process was everybody involved commenting on what was going on. So that was Lisa. I'm rushing a bit but there you go. If we think about, do you remember the teacher in Cologne who said, I do all this correction and I give the thing back, it's so unfair. Well, the whole point about feedback on written work is that it has to be feedback, not correction. It seems to me. The point of feedback is not to say wrong. The point of feedback is to help you to be right-er. That's what it's for. So if you are going to use correction symbols, and by the way, they're a jolly good idea in their own way, because if they provoke students to think about what they've been writing, so much the better. But if you are going to use correction symbols, well then obviously it involves teaching students how to use them. Please don't bother about the details, but essentially, before students start using correction symbols, they need training in how to use correction symbols. This is the least radical thing I've said this afternoon, and I haven't said much radical, to be honest. But we have to get students to start noticing where errors are. We have to get students looking to find errors. Is this right or is this wrong? What do you think? And then we have to get students eventually to work out what correction symbols use and what they would use if they were doing the feedback. This is an example of a story. Do you know the story circle thing, the story circle activity? One of my favorite classroom activities. 5 students sitting in a circle, and everyone's got a piece of paper, and you dictate to every student, you dictate a sentence, and they all write it at the top of their paper. Once upon a time, a beautiful princess lived in a castle by a river. And they all write this down. And then you say to them, write the next sentence. And so after a bit of protest, you talked about, after a bit of protest, they write the next sentence. And you say it could be a big sentence, a short sentence, anything you want. Then they all have to pass their paper one to the left or one to the right. You know this activity, right? And then they write the next sentence. And then they pass the paper one to the right, and then they write the next sentence. And it keeps going round and round and round and round until the last student gets it, and then they have to write the concluding sentence. This was a group of mine in a place called Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, an intermediate group. And they wrote, once upon a time, a beautiful princess lived in a castle by a river. She was very clever. She always read and studied. However, she hasn't seen the Gurjos nature around her where she was living. She had a stepmother that hated her very much. She had a lovely dog. It was very loyalty. One day, her stepmother bought a basket of red apples from the local market. The stepmother putted poison in apples. Her dog saw what the stepmother do, so when the stepmother gave the apple to her, a dog jumped and ate the apple. Then the dog died. Silly little story. But you'll notice from it how lots of people couldn't think what to write, but they wrote something. It was very loyalty. Well, it may not be perfect, but you get the idea. And this is a classic kind of thing where you can then instantly get the students to look at each other's and see if they can come up with correction symbols and explain it. And of course, some of these correction symbols which my students wrote are wrong. But we can have a discussion about that. And the result of the discussion is they're now ready, maybe, to become involved in using correction symbols. But of course, using correction symbols only works if the handing back of homework is not a 2-minute activity. It only works if it's built into the time and the methodology of the lesson. So that the point of giving feedback on writing is for people to write better. So unless I can give you time to write better, there's no point in giving the feedback. The teachers in Aachen said, but we have hundreds of students and they all write these long essays. We can't get them to write them again. We don't have any time. Well, there must be a creative solution to that. Maybe you don't get them to write the whole composition again. Maybe they choose any one paragraph that you have corrected and they work on that paragraph and give it back. But however we do it, there's no point in feedback if it doesn't lead to something. Because otherwise it's just straight into the folder and home. I would say, if I had time, that the more we can get students to be involved in discussion about correction, the better. What I flashed through there were things like Tricia Hedges' wonderful suggestion that when you're dealing with upper intermediate advanced students, for example, you can give them a list of things that you would like to correct, and they, the students, have to put them in what they think is an order of priority. So that you can decide, dear students, that the thing that I should be looking for most is, say, coherence and cohesion or something like that. Whereas a different group of students might want to look more for grammatical accuracy or something. But what she's essentially saying is the moment the students get involved in the process of correction or feedback, the moment students have some say about it, the better it is. Here's a little story about that. My brother is an English teacher, and a very good one as it happens. And he used to teach at the Wimbledon School of Languages, which is, funnily enough, in Wimbledon, in South London. And what Philip noticed is that it was a Korean student who said to him one day, Philip, why do you correct us? When do you correct us? We don't quite understand. Which is actually what probably most of our students would probably say if we asked them. And so he started thinking about it, and he noticed that he relied, because he's a very liberal-minded, sweet man, he realized that he relied almost exclusively on your implicit kind of gentle correction, because he wanted you to love him. No, because he wanted you to feel good and relaxed and stuff like that. And of course, the one thing he never did was, if you were talking, saying something interesting, he was never going to correct you, because that ruins everything. When he realized that actually he didn't really know when he corrected and why, and he wasn't quite sure really what he thought about it, he did a questionnaire, and it went to every single student in the school. And if you were a low-level student, you had to get one of your friends from the same country to help you understand the question. And one of the questions was this big question about, when do you correct a student if they make a mistake? When do you give feedback if students make a mistake? If you're saying something really, really interesting in a fluency activity, should I correct you? Well, if you read the methodology books, you'll probably find that the writer says, you know, when students are involved in a communicative activity, you don't just kind of correct, bash, correct them. You kind of, don't you? You kind of hover, you listen. And then when it's all over, you gently point out some of the mistakes you heard. And we do that because interrupting you when you're saying something fantastic is not right. It will be no surprise to you to learn what his students said. Remember, all the students in the school. More than 94% of his students says, we don't want to wait to be corrected until afterwards. We want you to correct us the moment we make a mistake, whatever we're doing. Does that sound believable to you? That's what students want. If you ask your students when they want correction, they will almost all tell you that they want it straight away. And there's quite a lot of evidence which suggests that some students actually, if they do a really interesting activity, the last thing they want when it's stopped being interesting is to talk about any stupid mistakes that were there. And actually, you have this belief, rightly or wrongly, that you want me, because I'm the expert teacher, to correct you the moment you make a mistake. Philip's got a problem because, as I said, the methodology books say you don't interrupt people in the middle of a fluency activity. I used to think that the reason you don't interrupt people in a fluency activity had some kind of moral dimension. It's kind of immoral to interrupt you when you're saying something really, really interesting. It's kind of bad of me. But that's not really why we've always said that people shouldn't be interrupted. It's more because we kind of want students to suffer. In a way, the whole point of trying to get you to be fluent in class is to make you have to work at it and to try and express yourself. And part of that expression is kind of making mistakes and screwing up and finding a way around it, because we believe profoundly that the process of trying to communicate is as good for your learning as the communication itself. It's the thinking about it and trying to do it that really works. Anyway, what Philip did then is, of course, what Philip did was when he got all this information, he said to his students, all right, I'll correct everything you say when you say it. So he did. And after a bit, the student said, oh, for God's sake, will you please stop correcting us? And then they've got space for a conversation. Because correction, do you remember Hero saying, are you trying to say my pronunciation's bad? It's an intensely personal issue. And the moment he gets this response from his students, he's in a position to have a really sensible teacher-learner discussion about what's going on. And they will find a place in the middle somewhere, which will be the most suitable for them. Of course, what Philip was doing is a classic action research cycle. That's why I mentioned Divya's talk here in this room, no, or some room over there, yesterday, because she did a wonderful talk about action research. Classic action research cycle says you identify a problem or an issue. That's Philip saying, not sure how I correct really. Then you think of questions to ask, and you saw Philip's little questions. Then you go and collect the data, which is you give the questionnaire to the students or whatever it is you want. Then you analyze the data, and as a result of the data, you decide what to do. In his case, okay, I'll correct everybody. And the result of all that, you seem to head straight up back to the beginning, all over again. Right. One other thing to say, and then I'll make some conclusions, and then you can say if there's anything you want to say. Is there's one other thing, well, at this moment, there's one other thing I want to say, which is that, do you remember I told you the story about the wedding dress? That's a transcript. In other words, written down exactly were the words that the teacher and the students used. It is amazing how much you can learn from studying a transcript. In one of my other books, we filmed a number of lessons, and so all of them were transcribed. And we don't have time to look at this now, but just to give you a flavor, I've put the teacher's responses in this transcript. By the way, this is different from watching it on film. There's something about reading the transcript which makes it interesting. So the teacher is saying, what kind of things were important when you were choosing? Oh, by the way, she set up a role play of speed dating. They had to think of 5 questions you'd want to ask someone you were thinking of marrying. And then you interview each other, and then she did do you know the outer inner wheel activity? Where you have the whole class in an outer wheel, and then there's the rest of half the class in an inner wheel facing outwards. And so they work in a pair, and then after whatever it is, they just move one to the right. So you get lots of, and so this was a kind of pretend speed dating, fun role play. And she's doing feedback. Well, what kind of things were important when you were choosing? For the men, what did you think was the most important thing? The real person, oh, okay, in real life, yeah, okay, right, yeah. So if they're a good person, yeah. Anybody else? what kind of follow-up move is she doing, and how effective is it? We won't go into detail, but even from that tiny little thing, you've got evidence which is really interesting. Then she says, maybe if you're talking to the other person, it's important to feel that he's interesting in your answers, because no just ask and ask and ask and try to know everything, just interesting your feelings. So knowing that he's interesting in your answers. Interesting, is that okay? Interested, yes. So what's the difference between the ing and the ed? Someone's feeling, yeah, so ed. I'll put someone's feeling, and the ing? Things that make you feel. Yeah, exactly. So knowing that he's interested in your answers, yes, yeah, definitely, okay. She's not bad, this teacher, by the way. She's when you watch the video of her teaching, she's blindingly, fantastically good, apparently. That's what you see on the film. But the moment you analyze a transcript in detail like this, you really learn something about how we follow up what students do. And we've got something to really talk about. Transcription, by the way, is difficult. It takes a long time. But it's incredibly insightful. Oh, and I was just going to mention the lovely article by this woman, Elspeth Pollock, from English Teaching Professional from November 2012. And she just has lots of lovely ideas. For example, the common mistakes idea. Does anyone do that? Common mistakes on posters. And you can draw devil's faces or something if you want, and that's quite fun. Or using Jing and Camtasia. Does anyone use Jing and Camtasia? Yeah, so for feedback. Really useful, isn't it? Very briefly.
Oral feedback, for example, if I have a writing class and I'm having enough time to give some oral feedback, and I just use it to give some extra speaking tasks for students to talk about it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic. In case you don't know what on earth she's talking about, Jing and Camtasia are screen capture software. So you can basically record exactly what is on your screen as a little video. So for example, you can have a student's work on your screen, and you can put circles around it or change the colors, and at the same time you can talk and it will record your voice. And you can then send your student a little bit of feedback where they actually see you working with your writing and talking about it. Fantastic way of using feedback. Camtasia is the same, only it costs more. If you have a, this is back to your board thing, JJ. If you have an interactive whiteboard in your class, hand the keyboard around and get different students to try and rewrite sentences. You remember we were going to problematize her sentence. Imagine if we got her to write a sentence on the board, and then the keyboard went around the class and they all had to rewrite it if they wanted to. And suddenly everyone's involved with what's going on. I love the hiding the correction under chairs. Different corrections, and you hide them under the chairs. The students have to find them. I love Wong and Waring, who, as you can gather, I've got a soft spot for them. I mean, I have no idea who they are. Well, I have, because I've read their abstracts, but you know, I don't know them. But I've got a soft spot for them because their article is so perfectly formed. And I love this. I just think this is so cool. It's like one of those X Factor voting things. And if a student says, all the students have red cards and green cards, like a Brazilian restaurant. And if a student says something, they'll have to hold up the green card if they think it's correct and the red card if they think it's false. And it's funny. Or is it? Because I'm not quite sure how you're going to take it. And unless I'm sure, I've got to be careful with things like that. So, here we go. I've got 3 possible conclusions to what I've been talking about in a rather scattergun kind of approach. And now is the time I should have given them. Here we go, very quickly, 3 conclusions. Number 1, instead of focusing only on correction, we need to focus more on all the ways we respond to what students say or write. A training session on correction is probably the wrong way round. It's training sessions on feedback that we need, in which category something about correction may be part of the deal. The more we involve students in decisions about how correction takes place, or feedback, or whatever you call it, the better. Because in the end, if I can involve you emotionally as well as linguistically, we're going to do better If you're happy with what I'm doing, it's going to be better than if I go, da, da. So involving students in what's going on is fantastic. And finally, we need to examine our own practice in any way you can. Philip did it by posing himself a problem and trying to find answers and then working with what he got. With Laura's class, I got a transcript and used that to not to read the whole class, but to focus on about 5 minutes. And in 5 minutes, you can really understand a lot of what's going on. If there's one thing I think everyone in this room should do if they have not done it, it's just to put a camera in the back of your class and leave it running. And then watch it. And if you've never been filmed before, you will nearly die of fright. Because it's very strange to watch yourself on film. But once you've got used to it, it would be amazing just to put a camera in the back of your lesson and then watch it, and the only thing you watch for, the only thing you pay attention for, is how you respond to students. And my gut feeling is you'd get some surprises. Because I'm talking about myself here. So much of what we do is sort of done on instinct and feeling. And some of that's really good instinct and really good feeling, especially as experience tells us more and more about what we do. But watch yourself teaching. Watch the film. Watch how you correct. And who knows what might change. Anyway, I'm sorry, I've just talked actually, but that's the way it goes. This talk has to be over because otherwise Butch is going to come and hit me. And I don't like that because she's a very scary lady. Thank you very much for coming along to my talk. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you. Oh, look.
It's for you.
Look. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.